You are listening to Inception Radio Network, voice of the fringe majority. This is Carol Carl with UFO Headline News. Tonight, you might be able to find the constellation Cepheus. Cepheus, we'll just stick with what we usually hear. Cepheus, that represents a king. The constellation is faint, but its distinctive shape makes it easy to locate if you're looking to the north on August and September evenings. At nightfall, Cepheus appears to the upper right of Polaris, the North Star. Then this constellation rotates around Polaris in a counter-clockwise direction during the night. It swirls high over Polaris after midnight and then sweeps to the left side around dawn. Cepheus resembles a stick house, that house we all drew as children, and children today are still drawing the square for the base, triangle for the roof. In the case of Cepheus, the tip of the roof is a star known as Gamma Cephei, or Errai, that's spelled E-R-R-A-I, and it points generally northward. Oh, in the sky, though, northward, well, that always means toward the sky's north pole, or toward Polaris. Thus, the roof of the house in Cepheus is pointing mostly north, even though, as darkness falls, that means it's pointing sideways and downward. Oh, are we dizzy yet? When things come back to normal, we can later consult a sky chart. The constellation Cepheus the King will be right there. Find your way to ufoheadlinenews.com for all kinds of sky charts that show you the constellation of Cepheus the King. In Greek mythology, Cepheus represents a king of Ethiopia. To find Cepheus, you might want to locate that more prominent constellation, Cassiopeia the Queen. She'll also help you steer your cyber sky ship in that direction. So here's the bottom line. Let Queen Cassiopeia show you the way to the house of Cepheus the King. And you can chalk up another success for SpaceX. Here's the headline. SpaceX successfully launches and recovers Falcon 9 for CRS-12. Daryl Etherington gets the byline here for TechCrunch.com. SpaceX has successfully launched yet another rocket, this one carrying a Dragon capsule loaded with over 6,400 pounds of cargo destined for the International Space Station. That makes an even dozen for ISS resupply missions launched by SpaceX under the contract to NASA. And this is the most significant thus far in terms of potential scientific impact. CRS-12's payload was over 75% committed to hauling equipment and material for astronauts on board ISS, but this was intended more to set the stage for a range of experiments to be conducted by researchers on board the ISS during this year and in 2018. There's even something called an AR system on board, designed to help astronauts improve their general efficiency. The rocket successfully launched from NASA's Kennedy Space Center at 12:31 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and Dragon deployed from the second stage as planned. Dragon will rendezvous with the ISS on August 16th for capture by the station's Canadarm2 robotic appendage, after which it will be attached to the rocket. After roughly a month, it will return to Earth after leaving the International Space Station with about 3,000 pounds of returned cargo on board and splash down in the Pacific Ocean for recovery. There's another reason this launch was significant, aside from the experimental payload, which included a supercomputer designed to help humans travel to Mars. SpaceX will only use reused Dragon capsules for all future CRS missions, the company has announced. And that means this is the last time a brand new Dragon will be used to resupply the ISS if all goes according to plan. The launch included an attempt to recover the Falcon 9 first stage for reuse at SpaceX's land-based LZ-1 landing pad. The Falcon 9 first returned to Earth as planned and touched down at Cape Canaveral roughly 9 minutes after launch. Here's a delicious segue. A very tasty treat is on its way to astronauts aboard the space station. Trevor Mogg gets the byline for Digital Trends. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station are about to take delivery, well, they have at the time you're hearing this, delivery of goods from a Dragon capsule following another successful rocket launch by SpaceX at the Kennedy Space Center. This particular 6,400-pound delivery contains a bundle of science experiments that include a number of live mice. But the astronauts probably have their mind on something else that's been packed inside the capsule. Something cold, sweet, and really rather tasty. Something they don't get much of in space. We're talking ice cream. Who wants ice cream? Oh, the unmanned Dragon cargo ship is currently on its way to the ISS, and it has arrived, of course, by now. It's then, says Trevor Mogg, who writes this, that all hell could break loose on the space station as the crew scrambles to get at the freezer containing this icy treat. Packed into 30 small cups, the ice cream flavors include chocolate, vanilla, and birthday cake. Presumably that particular one is for newly arrived American astronaut Randy Bresnik, who turns 50 in September. Deliveries to the ISS of regular ice cream, not that nasty freeze-dried astronaut ice cream, don't happen every day. And so the current space station crew is in for a real treat, as long as they like ice cream, that is. By coincidence or design, there's also another kind of ice cream heading to the space station aboard the Dragon. It's actually a scientific experiment which is called the Cosmic Ray Energetics and Mass, which NASA is calling ISS Cream. See what they did there? The 3-year experiment will measure the charges of cosmic rays, with collected data helping researchers with the, quote, fundamental questions about origins and histories of cosmic rays, building a stronger understanding of the basic structure of the universe, end quotes, and that's NASA. The last time we heard of ISS astronauts getting excited about food was when they tried some lettuce that they grew on board back in 2015. No, the excitement didn't come from their overriding love for the leafy green vegetable, but instead because it was the first food grown and harvested right there on the space station. The lettuce-based meal was part of an ongoing research to find ways for astronauts to grow food in space so they can sustain themselves on future missions into deep space. It's not clear if NASA is working on an ice cream maker. Oh, we're just picturing the good humor man in space, all suited up, handing out those eclair bars. Yum. It's Way Back Wednesday, and we'll continue with our saga of cosmonauts, generals, and aliens. But first, in order to test the efficacy of our time machine for today, we're going to wander back and forth. Our story about the aliens and the cosmonauts, that takes place in 80 and 81. Let's go back to 1930, shall we? Here's a headline, UFO 1930, an Alabama family account. Well, this is Cheryl Costa, so settle back and enjoy. She writes this for her column New York Skies UFO blog, which appears in the Syracuse New Times. And Cheryl writes this in the first person, so here we go. During the 4 years I've been writing this blog, I've noticed that some UFO accounts, sighting accounts, seem to be handed down within families like family heirlooms. A particular 1930 account caught my eye because of its heritage aspect. The UFO sighting account happened in the town of Waterloo, Alabama, in Lauderdale County, in the late fall of 1930. First, some background. Lauderdale County was named in honor of Colonel James Lauderdale of Tennessee. Lauderdale County is located in the northwestern corner of Alabama, which borders Tennessee to the north and Mississippi to the west. According to the census, the county has an ancestral mix mostly rooted from all over the British Isles and, of course, Africa. During the cotton boom of the early and mid-19th century, Lauderdale County was known principally for cotton and textile mills. In the late 19th century, there was industrialization in the form of an iron industry. In 1930, the construction activity of the Tennessee Valley Authority to provide electrical power to rural areas made Lauderdale County and small towns like Waterloo grow substantially. The population of Waterloo was, in the 1930s, about 497. During World War II, it peaked to about 524, and presently is only around 200. Enter Jesse, a present-day adult grandchild of his ancestral observer. He tells us that his now-deceased grandmother was a teenager in 1930. Jesse, quote, "It was after dark, perhaps around 6:30 p.m., and my grandmother and 3 other schoolmates were waiting in a car before an evening play or musical-type performance at her school. They were a bit early, so they waited for someone to come unlock the school's door." End quotes. It's important to understand that at the time in rural Alabama, there was no such thing as street lights in remote areas where schools were located. Jesse continues, quote, "Shortly after pulling up by the school, the occupants of the car saw a bright light that looked like a ball of fire. My grandmother was in the back driver's side of the car, and she said the light was approaching the car from the rear passenger side. They all assumed it was a flashlight or a car headlight of someone to come and open the door to the school. The light got brighter, and it filled the car interior with light. It was so bright, my grandmother said it was as bright as daylight." End quotes. Over the years, the woman shared her consistent description with her children and grandchildren. Quote, "It was a bright glowing ball about the size of a basketball. It floated by our car about 2 or 3 feet away," Jessie said, and she recounted how, quote, "it moved forward on the rear passenger side from about 4 feet above the ground. It moved at the speed of a slow walk, and it was completely silent." End quotes. Jesse said his grandmother and her friend were so terrified that neither of them would get out of the car. But as the story goes, she related that the 2 boys in the car got out and followed the glowing ball of fire as it meandered into the woods. The boys came back after a few minutes and said it had disappeared. Quote, "The sighting perplexed all who saw it. Later, as adults, her friends recalled the sighting event many times over the following years," end quote, said Jesse. From 2001 to 2015, Lauderdale County, Alabama, reported a total of 28 UFO sightings. Mind you, reported sightings. 23 of them were reported in the regional area of Florence. Waterloo is part of the Florence-Muscle Shoals metropolitan area, also known as the Shoals. So, following Cheryl, we'll keep our eyes on that area. Small population, lots of reports. And that generational sighting factor, always interesting. There are those who guess it's something in the DNA. Here's a sighting from Errai, Pennsylvania. Well, they only spell it with one E, E-R-I-E, but it still sounds like Erie. The date of this sighting, 1975, November 18th. It wasn't reported until August 11th this year. It's MUFON case number 85848. Here's the summary, and it is what they call a memory flogger, folks, TV and cultural reference-wise. Here's what the witness says. "Settled down to watch Barney Miller on TV. Noticed lights through windows. Got up to see, and vehicle turned southwest and hovered for a half an hour. Went back to watch Barney Miller. Show was over. I know what I saw." And we're thinking he's referencing the sky, not the TV show. The sighting specifics give us a viewing distance of 101 feet to 500 feet. The altitude 500 feet or less. The sighting duration 31 minutes. This object seemed to feature windows. The flight path was hovering, then path, then hovering. And this object was shaped like a disc. Meteorology wasn't an impact at all. There's none reported here. But here's the sighting. It was in 1975. November, a Thursday night, a school night. I was settling down to watch Barney Miller, that sitcom, a detective show. We had a large bay window in our front room. I was distracted by what looked to me like headlights shining through the bay window. And I thought to myself, who would be on the gas line trail this time of night? That trail was a popular four-wheeler trail, snowmobile trail. However, there wasn't any snow on the ground. I got up to see what was going on. I was watching this coming from the northeast. It turned toward the southwest. That's when it turned that I could see the broad side of a red glowing object. I went onto the front porch and observed this craft floating across our fields, the fields of our farm. It was red, glowing, and I could see a craft through that glow. It had windows and beings on board, 3. I watched the object until it floated out of sight. I was pretty distraught. I was shaken.
The summer's biggest duo are feeling the love.
Give up that wheel.
Have you ever said please?
Please, mother! Why are we always yelling?
Ryan Reynolds raves. Sam Jackson is obnoxious in every way.
Can't someone just taser him?
Samuel L. Jackson calls Ryan Reynolds extraordinarily annoying.
Not a fan.
How about we never speak of this again?
And Selma Hayek proclaims,
there is one thing you should know.
Sam and Ryan need to stop flirting and get a room already.
What? Really?
The Hitman's Bodyguard. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent. Now playing.
However, the chill from the crisp November night finally made me realize I was cold and I'd better go back inside. I was completely mesmerized. I couldn't seem to take my eyes off this object. But I went back inside the house, and Barney Miller was over. So I had watched this object for half an hour. I know what I saw, and nothing can convince me it was anything but a craft that originated somewhere else, off-planet. Thank you for your time. I've only told this story to very close friends, and that was when I realized that I was losing a lot by telling the story. But I'm too old to care what other people think. Take it for what it was. Oh, well said. And losing a lot by telling the story, we have to get rid of that attitude. This witness came forward finally after all these years. What a good feeling that must be. And what a fascinating feeling it must have been for the Russian cosmonauts to relate their strange happenings in space. It's Way Back Wednesday, Part 2. Headline, Russian cosmonauts and generals confirm UFOs are real. This information was brought to UFOevidence.org website. Michael Hessmann is the principal researcher here. He spells that Hessemann. And here's something about Michael Hessmann. He was born in Dusseldorf, Germany. He studied history and cultural anthropology at Göttingen University in Germany and currently lives in Dusseldorf and Rome. His books are international bestsellers. He's produced several award-winning documentaries and worked as an advisor for TV shows such as The X-Files, Sightings, and Encounters. Michael Hessmann is a regular guest on several radio shows in the United States and Mexico, including Whitley Strieber's Dreamland, the 20th Century Show with Bob Hieronymus, and the Hilly Rose Show, and in Mexico, Tercer Milenio. He was the first Western researcher who published the KGB files on, quote, anomalous aerial phenomena, end quotes, officially released to him. He interviewed United States astronauts Gordon Cooper and Edgar Mitchell and several Russian cosmonauts. So we're back in. Picture this, if you will, gentle listeners, a lecture at the International UFO Congress in Laughlin, Nevada, March 6, 2002. Michael Hessmann is presenting filmed interviews with 4 Soviet cosmonauts and 4 high-ranking Soviet generals. We'll hear from a couple of said generals and cosmonauts. A brief recap. Between May 14th and May 18th, 1981, cosmonauts Vladimir Kovalyanik and Viktor Savinky supposedly established contact with an object of unknown origin and its occupants. At the time, the cosmonauts were working on board the Salyut 6 orbital station. This object seemed to be half the size of the Salyut 6, which was about 8 meters in size. That UFO remained in position for the rest of the day, and the next day was only 100 meters away. At that distance, the cosmonauts were able to get a better look. They couldn't see anything that indicated some source of propulsion. Nothing they could detect would have given the ship an impulse to get closer. This ship had 24 windows on 3 levels. And the cosmonauts could also see 3 humanoid creatures inside, creatures wearing helmets, but they could still see their faces, big eyebrows, straight noses, and big blue eyes that didn't express any emotion. In fact, according to the cosmonauts, none of the muscles of the faces of these creatures was moving. All their movements seemed normal, but somewhat mechanical, artificial. So, contacting their version of Houston, the cosmonauts requested permission from Earth to try some visual and physical contact. They got a yes on the visual contact, a no on the physical contact. At that point, cosmonaut Kovalyanik grabbed and opened a map of the universe and held it toward the beings. They answered by opening their map, which seemed to be much more precise, more complete. The occupants of the other craft pointed to the solar system inside the Milky Way. And then Kovalyanik made a positive sign with his hands. The beings answered with the same gesture. And then the spaceship went away very fast, but soon came back. The ship repeated this action 6 times in all with no clear reason. And then, at that point, using a powerful flashlight, Kovalyanik tried to communicate via Morse code. He signaled, quote, "Soviet cosmonauts salute Earth visitors," end quotes, in Russian. No understanding there, so he tried the signal in English, saying, "Are you receiving us?" No answer again. And then he tried to use binary language. He signaled 101101 with his flashlight. And astonishing, the message in return wasn't a simple answer. It used a logarithm to the base used by Kovalyanik. The next day, the beings were flying outside the ship. Again, upon requesting permission to disembark, that permission was denied. By the 4th day, the ship simply vanished. The upshot of this extraordinary contact was that on June 18, 1981, the GAZ plan, the Economic Council of the then Soviet Union, called an extraordinary meeting. Several Soviet authorities, ufologists, and cosmonauts attended that meeting. And Kovalyanik presented the video he filmed, 45 minutes long, showing the UFO and its beings. There were other sightings by cosmonauts, such as things that appeared to be beautiful Christmas tree decorations seen over Newfoundland, bright, shiny, glittering. There were 2 golden spheres seen by another cosmonaut. Let's hear from Soviet Air Force cosmonaut General Pavel Romanovich Popovich. Quote, "I had only one personal encounter with something unknown, something we could not explain. This was in 1978 on a flight from Washington to Moscow. We were flying at an altitude of 30,600 feet, and suddenly, when I looked out through the windshield, I noticed something flying about 4,500 feet above us on a parallel course. A glowing white equilateral triangle resembling a sail. Since our speed was 600 miles per hour, that triangle must have had a speed of at least 900 miles per hour since it overtook us. I called the attention of all passengers and crew members about this object. We tried to find out what it was, but all attempts to identify it as something known ultimately failed. This object looked like a UFO, and it remains unidentified. It did not look like an airplane, since it was a perfect triangle. At that time, no airplane had such a shape." And now a quote from the head of the General Zhukov High Command Academy of Air Defense in Tver, Russia, former High Commander of Air Defense for the Far East, a man by the name of Colonel General Gennady Reshetnikov. He says, quote, "Yes, there were particularly mysterious occurrences during military practice. At times, targets appeared on which fighters in the air or radars set for anti-aircraft missiles trained themselves. But it was difficult to determine what these were exactly. There were situations when a target answered to the signal, 'I'm your plane,' we have such a system of inquiry, or the other way around. It wouldn't answer at all. It was considered incomprehensible. Moreover, I'm aware of situations when, as planes which had been sent into the air were opening their side sights, they discovered a target, but upon reaching the determined distance at which the automatic weapon system which dispatched the missiles should have operated, suddenly the system broke down. Everything disappeared, even the target. Or maybe the plane warped through space to another position. They would conduct another attack, again the same result. These were interesting and mysterious occurrences. We try to take into account the problem of UFOs. Quite a bit of interesting material has appeared, and it's perfectly obvious that this needs to be studied in earnest, and that it's necessary to address the question on a governmental level. Right now, people are more and more inclined to believe that UFOs exist. But what stands behind this?" He continues, "A bit earlier, at the end of the 1970s and the start of the 1980s, I flew into the Arctic Circle, to the place where eyewitnesses had seen some kind of cigar-shaped apparatus with portholes. This was how the press in this area was describing it. This happened in the region of Norilsk. The object was seen several times. Traces were discovered, but no one conducted any kind of serious research there. When this became known to me, I flew there in a helicopter in order to examine the place. We even traveled out to the same place an extra time, but we didn't succeed in noticing anything special. Concerning the sending of airplanes, in particularly when we were in the framework of the Soviet Union, it's necessary to say that battle duties were kept up rigidly, and we sent up planes without all kinds of restrictions. Now we send up planes very deliberately on account of economic conditions. But personally, I many times ordered aircraft to determine if something is a UFO or not. They were unidentified targets for us. Yes, there have been several cases in which they turned out to be mysterious unknown targets on which the different detecting systems reacted, including our land, sea, and airspace surveillance. Sometimes our weapon systems were activated because of these objects. And then there's this testimony from Major General Vasily Alexiev, Russian Air Force Space Communications Center, Moscow. If we are speaking about my military capacity, it was in the 1980s when I happened to be serving not in a regular unit, but in the Central Staff. Working in the Central Staff entails close links with the units in the field and a large amount of traveling. There were many reports from unit levels regarding a large number of observations of unexplained phenomena. You should bear in mind that at the time much was simply denied. The subject was, to a large extent, a closed one. On the ground, however, people wanted to find out what was what, to separate truth from fiction. In that period, a lot of things were presented in such a way that you lost the desire to believe. Accordingly, an attitude to the subject became established, where not only was there no desire to believe, it was even undesirable to believe. Nevertheless, the information coming in from the bases was of interest, if only because it was not merely talk and rumors. There were eyewitnesses to phenomena, and that was reflected in specific documents and in reports from officials. At times, this information was of such a fascinating nature that it was impossible not to believe it. Later, the question no longer seemed so fantastic and began to be examined at the level not only of the Defense Ministry, but other government departments as well. This interest specifically expressed itself in certain experts being sent to investigate, especially to those places where UFOs, let's call them that, appeared quite frequently. I know a whole number of military bases in that category. As a rule, they are of strategic significance, rocket complexes, scientific test establishments. In other words, the places where there is a high concentration of advanced science, and to some degree, danger. Because every nuclear rocket, every Air Force installation represents a breakthrough, both in science and in military terms. It is, first and foremost, a peak, the summit of human achievement. And that is where UFOs here appeared fairly often. Moreover, individual officers and commanders on the spot who knew about the phenomenon and had no official instructions on the matter acted on their own initiative to investigate UFOs, recording data, and so on. I know that in some places they even learned to create a situation which would deliberately provoke the appearance of a UFO. A UFO would appear where there was increased military activity connected, say, with the transportation of special loads. It was enough to artificially stimulate or schedule such a move for a UFO to appear. In other words, some kind of conditional relationship emerged, and they detected it. We're an intelligent nation. Nothing escapes us. I know that at certain testing ranges, I won't name them, although it's no longer a secret, they even learned to make contact of a kind. What did that consist of? First, the UFO appeared in most instances as a sphere, but there were other kinds. Contact was achieved with the help of physical indications of behavior. Pointing your arms in various directions, say, the UFO sphere would be flattened in that direction. Raise your arms 3 times, the UFO would flatten 3 times vertically in that direction as well. Amazing. Contact, you decide, gentle listeners. Thanks again to the man in the high castle for these wonderful links. We hope you've enjoyed Way Back Wednesday. For now, we gotta bounce because that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Inception Radio Network. Follow today's broadcast at UFOheadlinenews.com. Take care of each other. We're all in this together.